I don't see it on. All right, we are live. All righty. All right, good afternoon, everybody, all around North America. Thanks for joining today. MilliporeSigma and JLabs proudly presents Startup Your Sustainability. My name is Matt Stockel, and I'm the Emerging Biotech Market Manager for MilliporeSigma, and I'm going to be the moderator for the day. Later in the session, my counterpart, Kristina DeMartino, will be covering the Q&A, and feel free to add any questions or comments right below in the Q&A chat. Our speakers today are Jeffrey Whitford, Head of Global Corporate Responsibility and Life Science Branding for MilliporeSigma, and Rachael Relph, Chief Sustainability Officer from MyGreenLabs. Thanks for joining, Jeffrey and Rachael.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So, Jeffrey, can you tell us a bit more about your role and what you specifically do at MilliporeSigma?
Absolutely, Matt. So I am the head of sustainability, social business, innovation, and brand. My job really focuses in on how do we drive sustainability into our products, thinking about it from a life cycle perspective. So there's all these different touch points from manufacturing, product design, going through to packaging, distribution, actual product use itself, and then end of life. How are we thinking about sustainability in each one of those key areas? And how can we drive sustainability into that process further so that we can provide options for scientists that help them decrease their footprint with more tools to solve some of these problems that we're facing?
Awesome. Yeah, very, very descriptive. That sounds perfect for large pharma and startups. Rachael, can you give a bit of background on MyGreenLabs, your role and how you got here today?
Absolutely. So MyGreenLab is a nonprofit organization, and we work with laboratories and organizations all over the world to help them identify in ways that they can reduce their environmental footprint. And I think very much in line with how Jeffrey is thinking about sustainability at Millipore, we are encouraging scientists to think about their research in those more holistic terms as well. Those thinking not only about how they're working in the laboratory, but where are they purchasing products from? Where are those products being sourced? How are they using them? How are they disposing of them? And what are all of those impacts? And most importantly, what can they do to minimize those impacts? How can they, as scientists, take active roles in that? So as a nonprofit, we were founded in 2017, 15? I should know that. Jeffrey's like, Rachael, you really should know that. We've been around for quite a few years, and as we got started, there were really just a few a few Green Lab programs that were in existence, mostly here within the United States. And we got together with those organizations and said, hey, how can we take the really great work that you are doing and the things that you have been thinking about already and help to spread those throughout the scientific community? And that really aligns with our mission to help build this culture of sustainability in science and spread the concepts and the ideas of lab sustainability to organizations all over the world.
That's perfect. And I know that's exactly what we're trying to do. We always talk about building the community. And I think you both stated actually the same thing, was encouraging scientists to think about the life cycle and impact of what they're using. And, for startups, it's from an early stage. And I think that's perfect. So that actually leads me to the first question, was really, many people see general sustainability and as like commercial or home recycling. And so in your opinion, what tools do you think are best to start or improve the sustainability in a lab setting?
Rachael, I'll let you go first.
Okay, sounds good. I think Jeffrey's doing that because at MyGreenLab, we have a lot of those tools. So, I think that one of the biggest challenges for people is they're trying to think about lab sustainability and how are we going to bring sustainability into our laboratory operations and into our science, is that they've never thought about that before. Most of us who are trained as scientists have never thought about sustainability as it relates to our science. And so I think one of the very first things that we need to do is become educated about that, right? We need to learn about the things that matter and what it is that we can do. And that's a big part of what we do at My Green Lab, is to help bring that awareness to people and help them identify those areas where they really can take action. And so we do have a number of programs that are designed to educate people. We have our Green Lab Ambassador program. We have a Green Lab Accredited Professional program. We have our Green Lab Certification program, which, in addition to educating, also engages people in taking action and doing things in the laboratory so that they can bring sustainability into their science. We also have our ACT label program that helps to engage not only the people in the laboratory in thinking about the sustainability of the products they're buying, but engages suppliers in being able to think about the sustainability of the products that they're supplying to these laboratories, and help them identify ways that they can reduce that impact.
Yeah, and I can jump in. I think one of the things that, Matt, you mentioned home recycling, and the challenge for scientific labs is that it's a lot more difficult. It's just much more complicated than, can I put this in a single stream bin? And I think that's where we like to say, just start small. It doesn't have to be solving every single problem. It really is about figuring out how you can start making a dent, because as you get more comfortable with taking an action to increase the sustainability in your lab, and as Rachel mentioned, there's a ton of really great free tools that you can access from My Green Lab to start you on that journey. That's really where is the most powerful start you can take, is just make that one small step. And then the rest becomes easier as you start to branch into it. And you start to see the different levels of product availability from different suppliers and the level of transparency and data they provide. That helps you to understand that we have more options available, with hopefully increasing data to help you make an informed decision about how you can reduce your footprint.
And I love that you said that, Jeffrey. I do think it's key to start small. I think as many organizations start to look at lab sustainability, they think, oh my God, this is such a big topic. How are we ever going to do something? And it's all about the small actions. Pick one or two things that you can do now, get good at doing those, and then work up from there.
No, that's such great messaging. And I actually wrote this down, or it said, education and take action. I think that's some of the most important things that I really took from that. And I know in my home life, so not my professional job, but, I try to be as sustainable as I can, and really learning about some things, like understanding that the recycling symbol and the resin symbol are actually two separate things. So that's something that I learned not that long ago. And it's very, I just think that education is the most important thing there. And I really glad to hear you both say that. But yeah, with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of, one-time use items and waste. And so where do you see some common, waste areas in lab experiments, in research, or maybe come across in your professional life? Where do you see some of those waste items?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think the problem is that it's everywhere. Like, there is no shortage of places where you can point. Part of it is because of that complication that we talked about of requirements for scientific research, that there is virgin plastic use, so there's no contamination or other things that interfere with the research, because we know at the end of the day we have to have results that we can count on. This pandemic if nothing else, has demonstrated the need for understanding if the data that we're sharing and the outcomes that we're sharing can be trusted. The stock in scientific information and trust in that has never been higher for the entire global population. We have a totally different understanding of what it means now, and maybe misinformed about 94% efficacy or 95% efficacy versus 76% efficacy. And I don't want that shot, I want this shot. When in reality, we really just want solutions that help solve the problem. And the good news is we have 4 really great solutions, that are I will say 3 approved in the United States, with 1 coming, and multiple other solutions in different parts of the world that have been approved. But I think it highlights the need to have trust in what you do. And so you can't mitigate or potentially ruin that by having some of these other things enter into the lab. So recycled plastics sounds great, but we have not necessarily yet validated those for use in a laboratory with the assurance that there's not going to be interference in the results. That doesn't mean that there's not an innovation out there or waiting. Maybe there's a company in J Labs that's working on ways to do this, and we will welcome those things. But I think it does highlight the challenges that exist, and then the need really to come up with systems that we can all count on. So if we're going to recycle it, how can we be sure and have transparency that it's not only being recycled properly, but it's going into another material that is, valuable. The end system the end piece of that recycling system, which is the back end, what product it becomes, is the next greatest challenge. We have a program where we take single-use materials used in biopharma production, for instance, and that becomes plastic decking. That is not a higher value material. It is another useful material that is going to something that can be used. But what happens if we could turn that into a higher value material that goes into something more meaningful? That's where really we need to get to, but we also all need to be paying attention to the transparency of those in solutions and where the material is going and what it's being turned into. And if you're not getting that transparency, you may just want to ask more questions and maybe choose differently.
So I think I have really two big thoughts when it comes to thinking about waste in the laboratory. And I think Jeffrey beautifully highlighted that when it comes to something like recycling, it's complicated. I mean, as you said, the resin code does not equal the recycling code. That can be very localized, and exactly where those materials end up really does kind of complicate, I will say, how we think about, was that a good solution for the end of life of this product? And I think, therefore, when it comes to material waste within a laboratory, the best place for us to focus is on reducing that waste in the first place, right? Find those ways that we can avoid that waste being generated at all. And that's complicated. I will acknowledge up front that that is not necessarily that easy. What's great is that there are some systems out there that are allowing people to reuse things like micro well plates and pipette tips, that you can clean those. And there is some data that is being generated to show that they are in fact clean, and you can get the same or even better results actually from these reused plastics. And so I think there's a lot of positive movement in that direction, but we do need to focus really on avoiding the generation of that waste in the first place. Looking at whether or not we really need to have a single-use item in this application, or whether we could use something that's more durable, that could be washed, that could be reused, right? In chemistry labs, this tends to be kind of easy. There's a lot of glass, a lot of ways easy to switch from that. Biology labs is usually where you see the most kind of physical waste, right? And so I think it is really thinking hard, do I need to use this plastic inoculation loop? Could I use a metal one instead, right? Kind of thinking about why it is that you have made the choice to use that single-use one. Does it really need to be that application, or could you use something differently? And finding, and again, coming back to that small steps thing, finding those areas where you could do that easily, right? Don't go for the moon and eliminate all single-use materials from your lab in one go. Start in one place, start with one work stream, one workflow, and go from there. I think the other area that there's waste within a laboratory that we don't really think about, because it's quite frankly invisible, is both in energy and in water, right? These are things that we just never think about. Water, we turn it on, it goes down the drain and it's gone. And energy, obviously you never see that at all. But the reality is that laboratories consume a tremendous amount of energy. Within a university campus, energy usage from the laboratories typically constitutes somewhere between 50 and 65% of that campus's energy usage. And water usage can be a similar proportion. So it's really important to also be thinking about how you're using energy and water in your laboratories and where those things are being wasted. And maybe I'll just point out a couple of examples of that. Energy is often wasted with equipment, and especially equipment that's being left on 24 hours a day. Right? You've got a water bath, you've got a stir plate, you've got a shaker, and you're just letting those things go all the time, even though there's nothing in them. And so finding ways to turn those off at night, either through stickers or reminders or with outlet timers, is a great way to be able to reduce energy consumption in your lab. With water, it's really important to look at the processes where you're using water. I know that when I was taking chemistry, I learned about the use of water vacuum aspirators, for doing something like a filtration. And that uses a single flow of water to create a vacuum, and that water just directly goes down the drain. So really taking a look at where you're using water in the lab and thinking about whether or not there are alternatives to those kinds of procedures, and really going with those can help you to reduce those kinds of waste streams as well.
So what you're saying is my mom was right to say, turn the lights off when you leave the room.
Indeed she was. She had a good point.
No, you guys both touched on, what I actually read also somewhere recently was, we focus on recycle. There's three, right? There's recycle, there's reduce, and reuse. And we seem to focus on recycle all the time, and we never think about all of them as kind of a trio and working together in unison. And I think both of you mentioned that, and it's so interesting that really is the truth.
Well, and I think not to turn this into a commercial for something that we've done, but I think this is also where we're going to need suppliers to go, is to figure out how they can help in that reduce process. How do they re-engineer some of the things that are single use and we don't have a solution for them yet to make them reusable? How do we reduce the density of the plastic used in that so that you can significantly contribute to scaling down the size of that? The SteriCup E is one thing that we go back to time and time again. We were able to reduce the plastic use by up to 47%. That's a meaningful step forward in the direction, not fully realized vision that Rachel was talking about, but it moves us in that direction. And I'm a huge believer about iterative improvement. We need to make meaningful steps, but iteration is actually okay. Transformation takes a lot of work. So until we can get transformation, let's have more and more people work towards iteration that then helps us get to transformation.
And I think that's such a great message for startups too, because you are in this early phase and you're in this point where it's like, let's just get this out the door. We just got to make one and make it happen. And yes, you're going to do that. But taking those iterations and taking a look back at what you just created and saying, okay, we got it, but how might we change this a little bit? How could we make some small changes? Will really help you to reduce some of these impacts, and what I'm going to go ahead and call pain points ahead of time. I think that many organizations, and I speak a little bit from past experience in past roles that I've had, are kind of taking a look at some of the products that they have and saying, wow, we really could have done that a lot better. And so if up front you can be thinking about, how do we make it so that this product could be recyclable at end of life? Or how do we make this so that we are using a minimal amount of material up front? Those are really key questions to help yourself, reduce those impacts and reduce what ends up being expenses later with your supply chain and how you're delivering products and how they're getting to the customer. And then what your customer is going to come back to you with requests and say, hey, you just sent me all this plastic and I didn't want it, and now I need your help to recycle it or do something else with it. And you're going to have to go back to the drawing board.
No, that's great. And that, I guess that leads into an interesting question. So I guess specifically for Jeffrey is, what has MilliporeSigma learned from being a large biomanufacturer and switching to greener practices? So startups aren't really reinventing that sustainable wheel.
There's still a lot of work to do. There's takeaway number one. No, I think what we understand our role being is that we have a role to play to make life easier for startups or for any company who's doing scientific research. And that's really this is hopefully the next phase. I wish we were already there, but that the expectation commonly should be that this is table stakes, that we are all thinking with this lens that Rachel was talking about, to change our practices so that we're giving customers the best options that have all of these things. It's not just then about product characteristics. It's about product characteristics. It's about environmental characteristics. It's about social and other governance characteristics. So you really get the whole gamut of things, and it's just a more evolved perspective of how we contribute as a business. And so that's why Rachel talked about designing this in right from the start. So we've got a program specifically implemented in all of our R&D units to think about and enable a 23-point check of how sustainability is driven into the R&D of a product. Dependent upon what type of product it is, different characteristics are relevant. But that's the exact type of framework that we need people to thinking about. And to be honest, that's not just for us. That's for, for a startup. How do you think about that as a part of your process? Because at the end of this change just keeps going. So while you may be our customers, your customers are going to be expecting the exact same thing. And you can use this as a competitive advantage. Typically, there are also, in my mind, I think there's such a misnomer with sustainability has to cost more. I think sustainability can actually be a competitive advantage that in certain instances can save you money, and also could be something that increases the value proposition that you bring to the table that could demand a higher price point for whatever you're developing. So this whole, I look at things from an opportunity lens. I do not use a risk mitigation lens for this process. So I come at this from a very different place than a lot of people, but I think that's the highlight. Change the lens that you're looking about. Think how this can be integrated in a different way. And that's really where you see the opportunity for possibility. And that's how we've approached it as a business. And I think we've been successful at it because we've come at it from a different way.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I think Millipore has been very successful at this. I think they do have really one of the best sustainability and certainly product sustainability programs amongst the life science suppliers. And, I think that especially for startups, I would say to not just think of your suppliers as your suppliers, but to think of them as your partners, to think of them as, the people who are helping you to develop what it is that you're developing, and take your feedback to them, right? If you have a need for something that's a little bit different, or you really want to be able to reduce waste, from energy, water, waste, whatever it might be, go to them and say, hey, this is really important for us, and we could use your help on this. Do you have solutions that immediately can help us with this? Or is this something that we could partner together on and try to find some new innovative solutions on? But also think of them as your partners in exploring how you might go about this, right? Jeffrey has an immense amount of experience and knowledge in this, and a lot that could be shared, a lot of takeaways that I think you can, really make sure that you engage with your suppliers on and say, okay, that really worked for them. Let's make them kind of a valued supplier in this, and take some of these lessons back into how we're doing our operations as well.
And I think to that point, Rachel, it also has a multiplier benefit, right? Because the problem that you're having is probably a problem that a lot of other people are having. It just hasn't made it back to the source. And we are extremely interested, and I'll say this specifically for sustainability, but I think from a quality or a functionality standpoint, I would be remiss not to say that those aren't important either, but I can speak for the area that I am, watching over. That's great feedback points that we can go back to our product teams to work on adjustments, because then that benefit doesn't just benefit you, but it benefits everyone else who's using that, and we can change the footprint, hopefully, of a product by taking that feedback to heart. And it's something that we've done. Like, I can tell you there are multiple examples within the portfolio that these kind of changes and adjustments have come from user experience, which has guided us to make changes. So that's something, definitely reach out, LinkedIn, email, carrier pigeon. I'm open for whatever.
We need to bring back carrier pigeon. I like that.
No, that's great. No, I remember I was chatting with Sammy, one of our colleagues, a couple weeks ago, and he had mentioned about a story, and really made me think about how creativity is so important here, and it really blends the lines between your professional and your personal life that I had mentioned earlier. Was a couple brewers I know that work in our R&D, and Jeffrey might know this story. was they brewed beer, and they also worked in the raw material R&D, and they found a way to reduce materials when they were making the raw materials, and the reduction was insane.
Yeah, just to clarify, they were not brewing beer at work. I want to make sure that everyone knows that's not what happened. They were doing that at home. It was craft brewing and winemaking at home. But they came across a text. Being scientists, this should be surprising to no one. But this is one of my favorite stories because it's relatable. They came across a text from the 1950s about how to strip a polyphenol more efficiently in a process, and they were like, "Wait a minute, we could use that for something at work." And they brought that in, applied it. And it was great. It helped us to cut the raw material usage for sweet potatoes to a third of what we'd used previously, and completely eliminate an organic solvent from the mix and move it to a totally aqueous-based process. So hazard, risk, all of these things decreased, and actually the product quality went up. But it's just a cool story of the blending of like our personal experiences with work experiences. And that's really where it becomes more powerful. I was having a conversation just the other day that I think the expectation about the B2C and the B2B worlds is really disappearing. I expect to have a consumer grade experience in my work life, just like I do my personal life. I don't have two different like expectations. If I get things, in certain time frames or packaged certain ways, I expect that to happen for my work life too. I don't just want that, personally and not professionally. So I think this whole blending of the worlds, bring that to the table, because when you bring those perspectives, it opens up a different, I think, lens or opportunity base for what you can actually discover or change.
No, that's awesome.
That is a really good story, and I don't think I'd heard that one before, Jeffrey. I'm glad that we shared that here. I think I would just add that, yes, this kind of blending of your personal life and bringing that creativity to sustainability is what you get, I think, when you open up how you're thinking about working in the laboratory and how you're thinking about your science. You open it up to that sustainability lens, right? That you're not just thinking about how do I make this reaction go, or how do I make it as efficient as possible, but that you also bring that sustainability lens so that efficiency doesn't just become a reaction yield, right? It becomes a matter of what are all the materials that I had to put into this, and how much did I actually get out of it, based on atom economy or another metric that kind of goes and say beyond something like yield. So I think that sustainability mindset and thinking about sustainability in the laboratory really helps you to see how you can apply some of these things, from different areas of your life or different parts of the laboratory to what you're doing right now.
No, that's a great point. And I guess from your perspective, Rachel, what have you seen from some of the larger companies that you've worked with, and really what does it mean to be Green Lab certified?
That's an excellent question. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we do have a Green Lab certification program, and that program is really designed to engage scientists in the laboratory in thinking about how they can bring sustainability to the bench in a whole variety of different ways. It's part education program, part engagement program, and of course there is a certification that comes along with that. And so as laboratories go through this program, they become aware of all of the areas where they are having some kind of environmental impact, and those areas specifically where they can take some action towards that, where they could do something a little bit differently. Simple things like closing their fume hood sashes, turning off the lights, not using water aspirators for filtration. Those are all really easy things to be able to do differently. And there are also some bigger things in there, right? Thinking differently about how you're purchasing products, actually taking a different approach to purchasing them, doing things like consolidating orders or engaging your suppliers and putting in stop codes. All of those sorts of things are kind of on the table. And so within our certification program, laboratories can take action in a whole variety of different ways. And we actually leave it fairly open for them to choose which ones are going to fit for how they work and what the needs of their laboratories are. And as they go through this, they take these actions. Basically the percentage of activities that they implement out of what's possible for them to implement determines a certification level for them. And we help them to continue to make improvements on that, to continue to find those ways that they can incorporate sustainability and continue to kind of advance these ideas and these concepts. So what are some of the big things that we're seeing there? You know, I think that everybody wants to focus on waste, right? And that's kind of where we started this conversation. They want to focus on recycling and reducing single-use plastics. And so, yes, a lot of organizations are looking at how they can do that. So that, and a lot of that does come down to the very specific products that people are using in the laboratory and what alternatives there are for particular workflows or for that particular product. And again, engaging their suppliers in those conversations about what those alternatives might be and really helping them find something that's different. But one of the easiest places for people to take action really is around energy. And it has, you know, such a big part of the footprint of laboratories that it really does make sense to go after energy. And so, you know, lots of organizations are now really looking at how they can incorporate more green chemistry into their science so that they can reduce the number of hazards that are in the laboratory, which then allows them to do things like reduce the number of air changes, which then has a very substantial impact on the energy consumption within that lab. So, you know, it's kind of this, I don't say trickle up effect in that you think about these small things that happen in the lab and it comes down to the chemicals that you choose, or even doing things like impacting the amount of energy that a lab can consume.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's funny because I feel like we've echoed through really this whole chat is this partnership, collaboration, community in doing all this, and really education. And you kind of touched on energy being so important. And that actually seems to tie back to the 12 principles of green chemistry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Rachel highlights is that there are, like, it's easy when you embark on this to think that this is a mammoth task. I don't know how I'm going to do it. But there is a really well-developed network and community out there and resources available for people to be able to tap into to help start to like make that easier. And as you hopefully see kind of the connection points, you see how things build off one another or connect and why it then makes sense. Rachel's point about green chemistry, decreasing hazards or risk, and then changing airflows. Like that's such a brilliant line of thought in terms of a tangible change that's not insignificant. Don't get me wrong. That like doing that process with your EH&S teams is going to be not insignificant. But it is the ultimate end goal of where we move to doing things that are safer for human beings, that then also have these, as she said, trickle up effects that affect so many different other things that you may not have been thinking about. But I think that, the message is there are a ton of great resources and people who are willing to have conversations about this and help people through it. And to be honest, like that's not a sellable thing for me. Like I'm not going to sell you on, I will come be your sustainability buddy for the low price of $699. Like I just like talking about it and I like figuring out how to help people through it. And there's a lot of people like me. Rachel talks with a lot of people all the time. Not that I'm going to offer her up for sustainability advice and personal consulting, but there are just a ton of people who are willing to have these conversations and who are willing to help because they've been through it. They have been through it and crawled through the barbed wire and made it out to the other side. And they're like, I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. So I'm committing to making this easier. And I think that network and community effect leverages the education, the learning component to help us all move forward faster together.
Yeah, and I think that's such a key thing. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, for $6.99, maybe I could farm myself out like that. But seriously, I think that actually that peer-to-peer learning is really key and is really what does help to accelerate this movement. And so at My Green Lab, we have what we call our ambassador network. It is, of course, free. Anyone can join and become a My Green Lab ambassador. You join an online community of like-minded individuals who range from from people in the laboratory, from scientists to safety personnel, even people within sales at an organization who are just interested in this topic, who want to learn more about it, who want to share what they have learned. And people come there and they post their questions and they share their learnings. And we have monthly webinars to dive deeper into topics that people want to hear about. And so I think that's a great network to join, right? And again, find a whole community of people. I think we have over 600 people. The program's been around for about a year now, and we have about 600 people who are part of that network all over the world. Outside of that, build a network within your organization. Get a couple people in your laboratory to talk about this. Spend 15 minutes at a group meeting once a month talking about a topic in lab sustainability. Be the person who comes with an idea or something to share, and then expand that. Get somebody down the hall who wants to be involved in this. Get somebody, at the organization that you're renting space from, JLabs, to get involved in that conversation, and help you guys to think about the things that they're already doing, right? That might be supporting sustainability in the lab and the ways that you could take further action. And then you can grow that even bigger. There are a lot of people, and I guess I would say absolutely join our ambassador network, find other people who are where you are. But if you don't find those people, feel free to contact us. And chances are we know somebody who's close to you who wants to talk about this too.
No, that's such great advice. And I think that, we're having this conversation around actually, talking and having the conversation, what tools would you recommend on moving that sustainable talk really from a theory, but actually into practical applications?
So we have quite a few resources that are on our website at mygreenlab.org. I know Jeffrey was not wanting to make this a commercial pitch, and I feel like I'm like, pitch, 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 yay, My Green Lab. But it's a reality. So we do have quite a few resources there that are available, and in terms of places that you might be thinking about for energy, water, waste, kind of community and procurement, things like that. And within that are really direct ways that you can take action. So I think as a first step, I would encourage people to go there, to find some of these topics and find the things that apply to what you're doing in the lab. And start small, right? Don't pick something like air change rates right out of the gate, right? I pick on that one before because it is such a big impact, and maybe also because I was reading about it earlier today. But there are many other things that are kind of much smaller starting places, like turning off your water bath, closing your fume hood sash, turning off the lights when you leave, not letting the tap run while you run around the lab and collect all your dishes, right? Those are kind of simple things that if you just take a moment and say, okay, I could do that differently, you actually can, and you really can find those ways to make small changes.
And I think it's perfectly okay, Rachel, for you to make it a commercial. You're a not-for-profit, so that's good. I think it's a bit stranger for us to do it, but I think, as Rachel said, they are a great organization that has a wonderful set of tools to help people through that journey. There are other really good organizations like Beyond Benign when thinking about green chemistry, and if you need more information about tools and resources, they're a great place to go for that type of information. From a corporate standpoint, we provide a lot of information as well, and different frameworks and tools that you can tap into and use and see what we're committing to do. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's ask questions and ask for quantification. What are the numbers behind it, and how are you putting, what's the proof in the pudding that makes those statements accurate or real? Just because somebody was like, oh yes, this helps reduce your carbon footprint. How? Please tell me more. I want to know more about the specifics behind that. And, I will say we're not there yet. We are making our way in certain product categories where we can provide that level of detail. Ultimately, that's where we all need to end up to be. And that's one component that we make a decision on. That's also not the end all be all. It's not just about carbon. It can also be about waste, and it can also be about water. But it can get dizzying to try to think about all these different things. So think about the metric or pieces that are really important to you, and then use that as a starting point to have the conversations, to ask for more quantification about those things. Because when you start seeing numbers and you start seeing kind of the proof points, it raises a whole different level of question. And I think it's in a good way, not in a way that's like, oh crap, I don't know what to do now. I think it just advances the perspective of how you start making decisions about what you're doing. And you just increase your level of thoughtfulness in that space. And I think, Matt, as you said, we have to get away from just talking to action. That time is past, to be honest. So if you haven't started, it's now, there's no better time than now. And there are people who are willing to help you. Find me on LinkedIn. Seriously, I'm ready to go. I will carve out some time, especially if you're on the West Coast. That's easier because I've got the East Coast and the Europeans quiet and asleep, and I can hang out with you guys. So
no, that's great. So I have one last question, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. And this is a fun one. So this is really, what is currently inspiring you? Whether it's a paper you read or a book or something that you watched. I figure I'd ask that before we jumped into some tough questions from the audience.
Jeffrey, I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So reading right now has been a challenge. I just have not had the focus to be able to do that. I am reading, I'm reading a book about diversity, equity, inclusion, and race in particular, and it's a fascinating component for me. But I have been digging more and more into the topic of sustainability, and I saw someone actually told me about the documentary on Netflix called Seaspiracy, and it is about the fishing industry that then turns into a plastics thing, and I think you have to step back. And as a person, I went to journalism school. Granted, I focused in advertising where I made up words. So it was slightly different than the hardcore journalism. It also taught you about understanding perspective and where people are coming from and being able to take in information and make judgment calls. And I think we all do this every day, all day. But it has become so, I would say, even polarized. And this was a really great example of watching somebody go through a journey of trying to sort something out and then creating all of these other things that came out of it. And some of the things as a professional within this space, I don't necessarily know if I agree with, but it spurs thought. And I think anytime that you can spur thought and conversation about a topic like this is really great. And you can navigate through that's interesting, I want to learn more about that. Or I'm not so sure I agree with that, or the facts line up with that, or you're looking at a set of facts one way. So that for me right now is just an interesting thing, because I saw, I would say, a spike of interest in this. I saw it in multiple outlets where people were talking about it. So that's my of the moment thing.
That's a good one. I had you go first so that I could brainstorm exactly what I was going to say there. I think one thing for me, I have a sort of pet peeve when it comes to film in particular. Scientists are often portrayed either as evil bad guys or as bumbling idiots. I pick Independence Day as a great example of that, and it absolutely drives me insane. The Martian is probably my very favorite movie because it was one of the few examples where the scientist was awesome and he was funny and he was clever, and the book was even better. And so I think that one of the things that's kind of getting me out of bed these days is that I think with the pandemic, as Jeffrey was saying earlier, the public's perception of science has never been greater, and the public's perception of scientists has never been greater. And I think that's just such an amazing place for this entire community to be right now. And in terms of the work that I do in helping, I would say, scientists become even more awesome, I think that's kind of what's getting me out of bed, is that we're in such a cool place. Let's just take it to the next level and continue to be more and more awesome and continue to be more like Mark Watney, I guess.
Yeah, the Martian is fantastic, and Seascape is now on my list to watch for sure. So no, that's great. So I guess at this time, I'll move to Kristina for the Q&A for any questions that came in. Kristina, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Everything has been great so far, and we do have some questions right now, and I'm going to go ahead. The first one is going to be for both of you. Sustainable green alternatives often seem to come at a higher cost than current options. But how can a startup determine true cost and potential long-term savings for being more green? What tools are available to support this?
Yeah, I can dive in on that one first from a cost perspective, and maybe Rachel, you can help with the tools. This is absolutely true. One of the things, and certainly at an innovation lab, you're going to understand the innovation adoption curve. And what happens there is that you really have to make an investment on the upfront to get technology adoption, and then move to where you can get more people adopting it and using it. It's really no different here, and we see this in a couple of ways. I think one of the things that I've been focused on, and so I don't control the pricing, so don't. I'm not going to be the target here, but I'm also an advocate for pricing policies that keep us in a range of reachability, so that are within reason, because there is a point where we just understand people aren't going to be able to afford this. So it's great that we've got this greener option, but if people can't pay the price for it or justify spending it, it doesn't make sense to have it. So for us, it really is about pushing for price parity at all possible. And if not, being able to give a clear reason. So for instance, I mentioned Stereo-Cut filters before. Those are more expensive. I want to say they're $1 more on average for a filter, which is not insignificant. But what you then look at from a total cost of ownership is, can you reduce the amount of waste that you have to send out? And so your cost for waste disposal is decreased because the volume is smaller. These are the type of things that I look at to say, how can we help make that logic or cause or case make sense for the customer, but really in the end, push so that you don't even have to do that, because we're working towards moving you towards price parity. That's not ultimately realized right out of the gate, but it is something that we're pushing towards. So do know that it is on our radar, and I am advocating hard to make that a part of how we approach this, that this is not the new way to like eke out a bit more margin. It's really an opportunity to transform science and build relationships long term.
So I'll speak a little bit on the tools side of it first. I think when it comes to the cost estimation and thinking about that, that it often does come down to kind of the resources and things that you have locally. What do you pay for waste? How much do you pay for energy, or how much do you pay for water versus your rent and all of that kind of thing? And those calculations, they can get, a little bit nuanced, let's say. So, you want to be thinking about the quantity of material that you're bringing in. What are those waste disposal costs? What are the personnel costs that are required to support that volume of waste? Is there a space cost that goes along with that? There are lots of different ways that I'm going to say people are thinking about the impact of things like waste, so that you can kind of pull in what we'll call the total cost of ownership of something, right? It isn't just about how much you pay for it, but it's how much you have to pay to store it, how much you have to pay to dispose of it, how much you have to pay to maintain the regulations, the right licenses to have it at your facility in the first place. There are lots of kind of hidden costs, I'm going to say, when it comes to ownership. So, as you're thinking about how you're calculating those costs, I would definitely encourage you to kind of probe some of those things and think about, really talk to your EHS group. Is a great place to start, because that's where a lot of the hidden costs are sitting, and get them to help you think about what you could do to maybe calculate that total cost of ownership of something. We do have at My Green Lab, we've partnered with suppliers and procurement managers and really the whole community to create what we call the ACT label, and that stands for accountability, consistency, and transparency. And I think it's been around for about 3.5 years now. And it really is, I'm going to say, our first step towards giving you that information to help you understand what that total cost of ownership might be, to help you understand really where all of those environmental impacts might be coming from, so that you can think about how they're going to be impacting you and help you to determine some of those costs. So we have those, all of those labels are available on the My Green Lab website. You can navigate to that from our programs menu. And, they're a great way to be able to kind of compare two different products. So if you're interested in buying some pipette tips, you can go there and compare pipette tips from one manufacturer to another manufacturer and see what the differences are in terms of how those products are sourced, how they're made, how they are packaged, how they're shipped to you, and ultimately what their disposal might be, right? So really helping you make some more informed decisions about that. Yeah, I think I'll stop there actually on the tools part.
That's great. And that was a question that I personally had, was kind of around the ACT and things that the Migraine Lab does. So that's awesome. So the next question that we have is going to be for both of you as well. How can we encourage and help small companies on tight budgets with both cost saving and sustainable options? Excuse me.
So I would say how you look at the problem or the challenge, they don't have to be intertwined. You don't have to do sustainability necessarily at an increased cost. There are some solutions that you can do that decrease that burden. And I think, as Rachel was saying, there are ways to actually reduce some of your like water use cost, even though water is ridiculously cheap. So that's kind of not a good one to use. Waste is also cheap. Energy is probably where you find the biggest benefit and opportunity to save cost. And we always look at it. I kind of, when we do energy efficiency projects, to me, it's like creating a bank that I can increase and spend my savings on other projects to enhance sustainability in other places. So to me, it's kind of a debits and credits situation, and the ability to kind of create that bank through saving energy then makes me able to make investments in other places to increase sustainability. That's how I go about it and look at it. I'm sure there are other ways, but I also think when you're thinking about product development, and like I said earlier, that this can be a competitive advantage. If you can think about the framing for sustainability and how you could provide a value to your customer base, whatever that product may be, I'm assuming that there's probably a sustainability angle that you could probably identify. And when you are able to do that, there is a huge investor base that is extremely interested in more sustainable tools or products or fill in the blank, whatever it is. That's an opportunity for you to exploit or identify a unique value proposition that you can hopefully, and I would say, I would be surprised if you're not able to extract the value out of the investment that you make. You know, we understand you have to be realistic. So it's not like somebody can charge you 500% more for sustainability. But I think there is, you know, certainly with the approach that we're looking at, there is definitely value to be had, and I think value that you can extend through the work that you're doing as well.
So I think that one of the things that we are seeing in kind of a trend, particularly at universities, but I think that also does reflect how startup companies are organized and how they're getting started, is in shared resources. Right? Lots of universities are kind of rethinking this model of, okay, I'm a PI, I've got a grant, and I'm going to buy all this equipment, and it's going to be mine, and it's going to sit in my room, and I'm going to have a couple of grad students who are going to operate it. The reality is the guy down the hall, the person right next to you, has all of the same equipment, most likely, or a lot of it, right? And so they're rethinking how they're having people go about that and really encouraging them to find ways to share those resources, to have more of these shared instrument facilities that aren't just the big instruments, you know, the NMR and the mass spec and things like that, but that include some of the smaller instruments as well. Using shared supplies of chemicals, right, can allow you to buy in bulk, which can often be cheaper, or you know, bulk supplies. Those can allow you to kind of share those costs. I know for startup companies, you guys got your own funding, your own budgets, right? That's not always the easiest thing to do. But I would say utilizing your networks to find some equipment, especially equipment, because that's, you know, is where a lot of the kind of capital cost is going there, to find ways that you can borrow something from someone. I mean, my husband's at a startup company, and he just went and borrowed some rather big pieces of equipment from a company that he knows, and they're going to try them out and see if they work for a little bit. You know, they are renting them, they're kind of paying for them, but it's a great way to get access to some of that stuff without having to purchase it. And of course, from that sustainability perspective, You're not buying it new. All of the resources and everything that goes into manufacturing it new isn't being expended. And so it's a great sustainable option as well.
Yes, that the shared spaces and shared equipment is definitely a great thing. And I used to work with academic institutions and always them being like, I have to run, I have to go to the other room, my time slot for the instrument. So, I mean, definitely relatable. I think we have one more question in the chat here for Rachel that we can get to before we close out. And so Rachel, they asked, do you see changes in the mindsets of younger scientists already towards sustainability?
Yeah, I think yes. Was maybe the quick short answer to that. I do think that it tends to be the younger generation of scientists that is just more open to completely rethinking some of these things, right? And I think it's because it's been ingrained in them maybe a little bit less long. I think for people who have been in the laboratory, they've been doing something the same way for many years and it's worked. Why should I change that now? Right? Great question. Why would you? And I think it is kind of that younger generation that is more in a position, I think, to kind of more easily step back and say, why am I doing it that way? Is there a different way that I could do that? And is a little bit more open to that change. But I would say that really across the entire community, we're seeing a much greater uptake of green lab concepts and green lab ideas, right? It's not to say that there isn't resistance in some places, but it really is kind of an exciting time that many people are excited about this. And I think some of it spills over from people's home life, right? They're watching sea turtles with straws in their noses and thinking, oh my God, is that a pipette tip or is that a straw? And wanting to be able to, come to work and do something that's a little bit different too. So I think it really is across the board, but yes, the younger generation is maybe a little bit more malleable in that.
Great. Yes, thank you. So I know we're coming up right about the hour here. So as we close out with Jeffrey and Rachel, I just want to thank everyone for attending today. And you can head over to the live webinars after with the account managers, and they will be open for an hour. And you can also play our trivia. The exhibit hall will be open until June 2nd. And I do want to thank Jeffrey and Rachel again. It was a pleasure having you guys. Do you either of you have any final thoughts before we leave today?
Well, thank you for joining us. I think you can tell Rachel and I just love talking about sustainability. But I think, just just get out there and give it a whirl, find some people, reach out to Rachel or myself. We can connect you with the network or figure out if we can help. But that's what we need is people who are willing to just try.
Yeah, I think that's a really great closing message. Just ask yourself why. Why am I doing it this way? How might I do it differently? What other possibilities are out there? And if you can't figure it out yourself, go ask somebody else. Ask your suppliers, ask somebody down the hall, hey, do you have this problem? Why are you doing that? And build your network, build your community, and share some ideas.
Great. Yeah, the best take-home message there is. Thank you guys again for joining us, and it was a pleasure having you, and we hope that we can all